What's up, everyone? Welcome to the March 24th edition of FanDuel Tournament Plays presented by PrizePicks. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. And as a reminder, you get one free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum when you sign up and make a deposit at PrizePicks. Be sure to use the code Awesemo to receive a 100% first deposit bonus up to $100. Tonight, we have a 5-game NBA DFS slate. Tips off a little bit later at 7:30. Also recording this video a little bit later because I finished getting ready for the first video, and then two different teams ruled out half of their respective rosters. So I had to start over. Such is life in March with the NBA. Get used to that for the rest of the year, I guess, because stuff's going to happen throughout the day a lot. Also, as always, be sure to keep, even though this is starting a little bit later, still be sure to tune into the deeper dive and live before lock. We do still have some pretty big pieces on the slate that are questionable and a lot of moving parts that we will have to talk about a little bit later. But for now, we're going to use the Boom Bust tool on Awesemo.com to take a look at 5 of the top tournament options on tonight's slate for FanDuel tournaments. Number 5, D'Anthony Melton, $5,400. He's projected for about 22% ownership, has a 24% chance of being in the optimal lineup. He's $5,400, point guard and shooting guard eligible. Now, one thing to keep in mind is I'm not that confident that D'Anthony Melton starts this game. John Morant, we know, is out. He should be replaced by Tyus Jones. Dylan Brooks is also out. He's, I think, likely to be replaced by either Zaire Williams or John Conchar, but that doesn't matter a whole lot. I mean, it matters in that if Melton starts, then I think you project him for 30 plus minutes. But if he comes off the bench, there's still a path, an easy path to mid 20s in minutes for him. He's well over a fantasy point per minute guy, especially when you take John Morant off the floor. So that is something just to keep an eye on. Depending on where you're looking, you could see him like right now projected even higher than he probably should be, and that'll come down. But it shouldn't. I don't think it should alarm you because I'm expecting him to come off the bench, and I still think he's a good play at $5,400 as long as the ownership doesn't get too crazy. Number 4, Fred VanVleet, $7,800, projected for about 26% ownership with a 27% chance of being in the optimal lineup. He is point guard only, and on a lot of slates, he would really stand out because, especially a lot of 5-game slates, because he is cheap for somebody that's likely to play 38 minutes. That averages about a fantasy point per minute. But tonight, the ownership's a little bit lower than it otherwise would be because, for one, he's facing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who aren't they're a solid team defensively. But 2, you have Zach LaVine playing without DeMar DeRozan at a similar price point, and you have Drew Holiday playing without Giannis Antetokounmpo and without Chris Middleton at a similar price point. So it's going to funnel ownership to those guys. And while VanVleet is still likely to be popular, it does keep the ownership in check. He still has a very high ceiling and is projected to go a little bit under owned here. Number 3, Nikola Jokic, $11,800 center. He's projected for about 33% ownership with a 38% chance of being in the optimal lineup. Jokic is far and away the best point per minute fantasy producer on this slate with Giannis not playing. And it's pretty easy to get to him because we have plenty of value already. We may have a bit more opening up later. And then one other thing working in his favor is that there are still good center options on this slate. But given that it's a 5-game slate and given that a few of the teams don't have centers that we really care about for DFS, or they have guys that are power forward / center eligible, it makes it a little bit easier. The opportunity cost a little bit lower at the center position than it normally is for Jokic. Number 2, Buddy Hield, $5,600 with shooting guard and small forward eligibility. He's projected for 35% ownership with a 43% chance of being in the optimal lineup. Hield is likely to play huge minutes tonight. He's averaged 37 or 38 minutes per game since joining Indiana. Last night against the Kings, Hield played 37 minutes. Nothing out of nothing unusual there. He's around a 0.9 to 1 fantasy point per minute guy. We already know that Malcolm Brogdon's out. We know Chris Duarte is out. Tyrese Halliburton is questionable. If Halliburton's out, it's not necessarily a huge bump for Hield because they just do different things. Tyrese Halliburton is around a 20 to 21% usage guy that is very, very heavily involved as a playmaker. Buddy Hield is out there to shoot threes and not do a whole lot else. They're not going to have Buddy Hield running point a ton, to pick up assists from Halliburton. So that is actually an interesting spot to pay attention to where, yeah, his usage rate might go up a little bit if Halliburton is out, but you would want to pay attention to how much his ownership changes, because if it gets a slight bump, that's reasonable. But if it, for some reason really goes up, I think it would turn into a spot where, as right now, assuming Halliburton's in, Hield appears to be under-owned. If it goes up a lot with Halliburton out, you could actually see him end up being over-owned later on. And number 1, Zach LaVine, projected for a massive 50% usage rate, but with a 51% chance of being in the optimal lineup. Basically a neutral play. But when somebody is that likely to succeed, it's really difficult to get away from them in tournaments. And typically for me, I'm going to end up still putting them into a lot of lineups and then being willing to take risks elsewhere in spots that I think are less secure. Zach LaVine is $7,200 playing without DeMar DeRozan in a game that's likely to be high scoring, barring injury, foul trouble, or blowout. It's extremely difficult to see how Zach LaVine has a game at this price tag that hurts you. And that's reflected in the 50% optimal lineup percentage. So typically my approach, and this is something that it's just going to be more important to think about as we get into late season NBA, because as guys get ruled out, you get chalk that is just very, very good and difficult to get away from. So if you're trying to differentiate in tournaments, a lot of times it becomes, do I want to get away from a player that is extremely likely to succeed just because they're popular? Or do I want to be more willing to roll the dice on some players that have volatile minutes and are less likely, like that are risky, that are going to fail a lot, but that also aren't pulling that much ownership? For example, on yesterday's slate, guys like Chimezi Metu, Jeremy Lamb, Teo Maladon, guys like that. That's my preferred approach, is to roll the dice on risky guys like that will be relatively low owned and will allow me to keep the high upside, high floor guys like Zach LaVine in my lineup. So to recap, the top 5 tournament options tonight on FanDuel: number 5, DeAnthony Melton; number 4, Fred VanVleet; number 3, Nikola Jokic; number 2, Buddy Hield; and number 1, Zach LaVine.